I'll send you one. Welcome to our March 2nd, 2023 meeting. I'm Dahlia Palchik, Chair of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. I'd like to note that we are starting the meeting at 7:03 p.m. We are live streaming the meeting, so we ask that commissioners please speak up so those participating electronically and listening through YouTube can clearly hear what is being said. We have microphones both around the table and overhead for the duration of the meeting. So please be mindful of side conversations and or paper shuffling. Tonight we have one commissioner participating electronically. The RPT Director, Jen DeBrule, is participating electronically from Richmond under the provision of living over 60 miles from our meeting location. Our Commission Secretary has already confirmed that we have quorum. And welcome to March, sunny March. This month's Commission meeting will focus on a number of NVTC signature efforts. First of all, we'll be approving NVTC's message to WMATA on our priorities for their FY 2024 operating budget and their FY 2024 through 2029 capital improvement program, and begin to dive into the difficult discussions of future budgets and funding needs. You all should have received what our draft letter is for that. Next up, Amy Crone-Cyber will provide a wrap up of the General Assembly session, though we know the budget is yet to be finalized. The NVTC Commuter Choice Team will present the projects that will be under consideration for funding under the I-395 and 95 Commuter Choice Program that will be going to the Programmatic Committee. We'll also get an update on the Route 7 BRT strategic framework and hear about the spring's public hearing in Falls Church. I believe we'll have a date and a location for that. And staff will also present some interesting findings on how well our bus systems are providing high frequency, late night, and weekend services to our communities. We do not have any action items for VRE. And then finally, we'll get our usual updates from the Department of Rail and Public Transportation and from our executive directors. But before we begin, Matt Letourneau, I believe you have some news you'd like to share about one of our commissioners.
Yeah, I just wanted to share, I'm sure some of the folks saw it today, that my fellow South Ridingites in Virginia and my state senator, John Bell, who's a member of our commission, announced that he is suffering from prostate cancer and will not be seeking re-election. John has become a good friend of mine. We worked together on a lot of initiatives, and I know everybody on the commission is thinking about him today with that announcement. Certainly wishes him well. So I just wanted to recognize that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt. And I know our hearts and thoughts here with him and with John and with his family. So thank you for sharing that. Kate, do we have any public comments this month?
We do not have any public comments.
All righty then. So we are on to action item 2. Could I have a motion to approve the minutes of the February 2nd, 2023 commission meeting?
So moved.
Mr. Chairman, with a second from Ms. Crystal. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Abstention from Senator Eben, who just returned from Richmond. Righty, so therefore the motion passes and we move on to action item 3. Tonight we have the consent agenda. Tonight we have 3 actions on the consent agenda, including the additional letter of endorsement that was posted earlier this week. A, to authorize an additional contract funding for NVTC's WMATA operating funding and reform working group. B, to authorize the chair to send a letter of endorsement for the City of Alexandria's application to the Federal Transit Administration's low or no emission vehicle and bus facilities discretionary grant programs. And C, to authorize the chair to send a letter of endorsement for Dominion Energy Virginia application, U.S. Department of Energy's Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnership, it's a mouthful, GRIP discretionary program. Can I please have a motion to approve the consent agenda? So moved by Mr. Aguirre, second by Mr. Smedberg. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Well, that also passes unanimously. And now we are rolling along to item 4, which is our report from the Virginia WMATA board members. We have our WMATA board members here to give the report. Matt and Paul, please take it on.
Thank you. I'll start and then I'm going to turn it over to Paul to talk a little bit about the NTSB investigation. But starting with the budget, we're working on our FY24 operating and capital budget, $4.8 billion combined. We talked about it quite a bit. I do want to note that there will be an in-person hearing at Meridian High School in Falls Church on Tuesday, March 7th at 6 o'clock, and Metro staff will be at the hearing starting at 5 o'clock. Just to give you an update on some of the discussion, last month's commission meeting, we talked a little bit about the issues related to challenges related to fare simplification, particularly as it relates to the off-peak rider. The challenge that we have is the off-peak rider max fare today is $385. When we eliminate the two-tiered pricing structure, which I think we're pretty united on the board and management to do, there's really no way to make a smooth transition there for that particular segment of riders unless the overall peak rider fare was something like $385, which would just be impossible for us from a revenue standpoint. So what is proposed in the budget is a max fare of $650 that applies at all times. About 3% of riders are riders that currently ride max fare off peak. I will say when you think about those folks, people are usually not just a peak or an off peak rider. They're a rider who happens to ride at those times. The max fare folks are the max fare folks. One of the things that we are contemplating, and I've had some discussions with management about, is not doing a fare increase on the max fare from what would have been the peak service and just keeping it at $6. The pushback on that would probably be that a lot of other riders are going to see a bit of an increase. However, as I said, if you think about those folks, those are also folks who are probably going to get impacted by the off-peak change. I've been working with the general manager, and I think that we have identified a place in the budget that we could cut about $2 million, which is the revenue gain from going to 6 to 650 in order for the budget to stay balanced. So I expect that to come up. We're having a work session in the finance committee on March 23rd on the budget. There has been some discussion from the Maryland alternate board member as well on this topic. I think some of those potential solutions are just really too complicated and would kind of eliminate the desire to have only one fare. So just an update on kind of where that stuff stands. We also adopted our strategic transformation plan, which I think everybody's familiar with here, and thank you for NVTC's help with that. So that kind of guides us over the next 5 years. We approved 2023 dedicated revenue supplemental bonds for our capital improvement plan. We are actually also looking for potentially applying for a TIFIA loan for some of these projects. It takes about 8 to 12 months to apply for a TIFIA loan. We did it in phase 2 of Silverline. Very complicated process, but with interest rates being so high, TIFIA loan actually could be a good option for Metro to be able to do some of the capital projects. We will have a larger bond sale coming up later this year. And we are planning for the first time, at least since I've been around, to do in-person credit rating meetings with agencies to help ensure that we are able to get the best credit rating possible. We had a presentation about our overall performance, which has been pretty positive. Ridership's been increasing in FY23. For 6 months of 23, there were 91 million trips taken on Metro. On the new Silverline extension, 330,000 passengers entered or exited the 6 new stations just between November 15th and December 31st. And about 40% of that were brand new riders to Metro, people who didn't previously take Metro. I've been tracking the Silverline extension numbers on a weekly basis, and I will say that last week, on the 6 new stations, we had 27,000 entries, which is the highest number that I've seen. It's been around 25,000. So I think we are seeing some of that coming back. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays are still the highest ridership days. There's about 10 to 20% more daily trips on those days than there are on Mondays and Fridays. Obviously, crime has been a major topic of discussion. tragically, as we discussed last month, we had a crime that resulted in the murder of one of our staff members. And then we also, a short time afterward, had a murder take place on our bus system between two passengers, violence between two passengers. So we've been trying to think a little bit outside the box on how to handle that. And the general manager has announced a plan to essentially establish MOUs with area law enforcement agencies for off-duty officers. Now, we're very sensitive to the fact that most law enforcement agencies have difficulty as it is staffing. And so it is, the MOU does not mandate participation at any given time. It just would allow for that participation if an agency had officers that are interested in doing it. Metro is paying a high rate to those officers for that. We're trying to really attract officers that may do private work, which some officers do when they're off duty for security. We initially announced a partnership with the DC Metropolitan Police Department. And so that began on the week of February 13th, and it will go through at least June. And so DC police are now present so far in 5 stations, and they're also freeing up transit police to be able to be more active on the system and actually moving back and forth. I met with the captain of the transit police that has the Virginia division under his command. And, you know, the good news is our stations are not the highest crime parts of the system, certainly. The commands, the way it's broken up, Law and Fawn Station actually includes all of Virginia as well. There's a couple stations in the district, and that station has significantly more crime than pretty much all the Virginia ones. But you know, it's an issue for staffing. We're under our head count, what we're authorized for the budget, as are many other law enforcement agencies. But we really believe that the public needs to see more officers on the system to restore some confidence, especially given some of these high-profile crimes that have taken place. We marked the 50th anniversary of Metrobus, which was pretty exciting. I believe, Paul, we had 3 employees that are original employees of Metrobus. One of whom we met. What's the gentleman's name?
Marks.
Robert Marks. Yeah. Okay, so this is unbelievable. He's a bus driver who has been driving for us for 50 years since the creation of WMATA, and he's won. We have this bus rodeo. Are you all familiar? This competition, this bus trip. Yeah. He's won the rodeo like 28 times, including last year. Yeah.
One last year,
So-
and is one national contest.
Yeah. So if you were on a Metro bus, and he's out of the Landover division, so he's not in Virginia, but you want this guy driving your bus because he was, you know. Anyway, so we had several. We also had a couple of our former executives, former general managers that were present to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Metro Bus. And I know, Kate, you shared with us some of the history. NVTC actually operated components of the bus system itself that became part of Metro Bus. So it's pretty cool history there. So then the last thing is part of our update is the opening of the public docket for the 7K, and I will let Paul pick it up there.
Yeah, and before I do that, it's not in our notes. Just to let people know, we had oversight hearings in the District of Columbia and out in Annapolis, the general manager and other folks were there, so. They were sort of your typical hearings, you know, a lot of good questions, a lot of good back and forth, got to meet a lot of folks, so that went well. So I'm sure you heard the news last night or well, yesterday, the NTSB opened the public docket. And I'm going to stick to the script here because we're still party to this investigation, so we have to be careful what we said until the report's final. The public docket for its ongoing investigation into the 2021 derailment at the Roslyn Station. This is the final report, and the documents provided do not state a probable cause. At a later date, they will release a final report, which will include findings, recommendations, and a probable cause determinations related to the derailment. While a probable cause has not been formalized and announced by the NTSB, the documents released identified a technical issue, a microslip due to reduction in the contact pressure. In other words, the amount of pressure that's used to press the wheels together. Based on the technical data, Metro is planning to change the way it presses wheels on the 7,000 series rail cars, which will be addressed in revised return to service plan, our fourth version, to the Safety Commission. Metro's initial and external engineering experts agreed that an increase to the fit and press tonnage used to mount rail wheels onto axles is required for the 7Ks. The current return to service plan marks a move to measuring the wheels to every 7 days as opposed to every 4 days, and will remain in effect until Metro receives concurrence from the Safety Commission on the revised plan, which is the version 4. Metro will continue its rigorous inspections of wheels with measurements for every 7,000 series rail car until its wheels are reassembled at the new higher standards. Preliminary estimate, and we've been working, or staff has been working with the technical experts and our own internal crew, could take up to 36 months and an approximate cost of $55 million to repress all the 7,000 series cars or wheel sets. So, that's where we are right now. NTSB will make a final determination or will make a final report likely in the fall timeframe, end of September, October. So until then, nothing is final, but we believe now that given all the work that has been done by content experts, by the NTSB, we have obviously been in very close collaboration with the NTSB and the Safety Commission on this issue. Now we see a way forward to really, address the issue. So that's where we are right now. That's all very good news because the more 7,000 series cars get back in service, the better, we can do in terms of increasing service and reducing sales. So pretty big news. Again, not final yet until later this year, but at least now we have a path forward.
Before I turn over to questions,
Yep.
because my one question, excellent news is the approximate budget of 55 million is that I assume is already incorporated in the budget.
Yeah, it'll
Is that
be
as
capital funding, so it'll be incorporated in the capital budget. Obviously, that's a big number. On the other hand, the context of the size of the budget is very large in the billions for the capital budget. So it can be incorporated
And spread out over 3 years.
Right, questions? I saw Commissioner Turner.
Thank you. Paul, if they come up with a new technical procedure to press the wheels, as I understand it, we're under a rigorous inspection schedule right now. Is that now an interim measure? And once we come up with the new technical procedures, it will obviate the need for the more rigorous inspection schedule?
That's the assumption. Yes.
We have to get the Safety Commission to approve a new return to service plan, but our plan is to request of the Safety Commission that all the cars, there's 20 cars a month that are going to be getting this treatment, that those cars be removed from the 7-day inspection protocol and returned to, I believe, a 60-day.
60 days.
And the safety commission is so easy to work.
And even at 60 days, that is still
A lot of agencies are
not even
or
close to that. It would still be a very conservative.
I heard Mr. Clark talking about we're never going to get back, and we've heard him say this, we're never going to get back to ridership that we had pre-COVID. I think that's what he said. I'm paraphrasing.
I'm not sure Randy hasn't really said that.
Yeah.
Others may have said.
If we don't, then what? I've never heard anybody say. And the corollary is, and therefore we have a huge funding gap. Starting at the end of next fiscal year, I guess.
during
Then
the next.
During
I'm
halfway
always thinking,
through.
so do we just stop running Metro?
No, so I mean, first of all, I think it's important to kind of decouple these things because just being candid, there is almost no amount of ridership that would solve the funding gap. Even if everybody came back and then more
And then
people
some.
came back.
What did we do before?
We had a structural issue that was growing over a period of time that COVID accelerated by probably 2 or 3 years. But some version of us would be sitting here in a couple of years having the same discussion about how, and it gets down to similar to what we're discussing with our county budget, our expenditures are exceeding our revenues. And you look at the expenditure growth, for instance, Metro has a labor contract that requires us to do CPI adjustments on salaries on an annual basis. So last year, that was like 8 to 10%
8 to 10%.
for every employee in the system. We're capped at a 3% subsidy increase request except for exclusions for new service. So we obviously can't grow our subsidy increases by more than that. So therefore, you see, you're gonna have a problem. So we will balance our budget. That means service reductions because of labor headcount reductions and other types of reductions if we have to. But what we all need to do before that point is come up with a funding solution that we recognize as a lasting solution through a dedicated revenue source, and that's going to require involvement with the state and Maryland and DC.
And Michael, we are the only major system, not only in this country, but the world, that does not have a dedicated funding. source. I mean, it's not sustainable. In fact, there's a report that was done back when Metro first opened. It stated then, right, yeah, even before it opened, that the model, it was not sustainable. Yeah. And, you know, and the brunt of it has been placed on the jurisdictions, and in our case, for the most part, localities. And we are keenly aware that whether you're a county or city, you are not going to be able to sustain, even at 3%. It's going to be difficult to sustain increases unless we come up with a regional type solution. And it may not be one regional solution, it may be 3 different, but there would be at least some sort of approach to it. So, yeah.
Thank you.
But hopefully we can start that discussion in a very thoughtful, honest way, well in advance of, you know, $725 million or $1 million deficit that, you know, we will all have to face. And, you know, that we know where the state budgets are right now. We know where your budgets are right now. That would be really a doomsday. You know, they worried about us closing 2 stations last time. Well, that would truly be a doomsday type scenario.
Right. Interesting year ahead. Any other questions or comments for members? Yes.
Just a quick comment. Thanks a lot for the focus on safety. It's much needed and much appreciated.
Righty. Well, thank you both for the reports. Very much appreciate it, and your service on the board and the representatives on the commission. I will now turn it over to the report from our WMATA committee chair, Mr. Alcorn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have one action tonight, item tonight, and that's approving the letter on the proposed WMATA budget and CIP. So the WMATA committee and staff have incorporated edits from several commission members. So just to summarize what's in the letter, which is before you and should have been distributed. Continue the safe return of 7,000 series rail cars, as we just discussed, and deliver budgeted service to ensure Metro makes safety and security priorities for customers and a priority for customers and Metro staff. Continue fare simplification efforts that balance ridership and revenue, while also reviewing ways to lower the per mile rate of consideration for suburban commuters, including the cost of parking in these calculations. Open the Potomac Yard Metro Rail Station for full revenue service. Support the policy goals and concept of the proposed low-income fare program with effective implementation, avoiding overlap with existing programs and fair cost allocation to jurisdictions. Concern over flexing such a large amount of maintenance funding into the operating budget and starting a trend of over-reliance on this budget. Continue progress on reducing the state of food repair backlog. Ensure close coordination with NVTC and jurisdictions for summer 2023 maintenance work, and continue active engagement with NVTC and its jurisdictions on developing long-term solutions to address WMATA's future operational funding shortfall, as was also just discussed. So once the commission endorses or approves the letter, staff will submit it, and those will be NVTC's official comments.
Thank you, and want to thank everyone who shared in feedback, and thank you for working with those of us who did, and And I do hope it does include the comments we had at our last meeting. And I guess my only question for Mr. Letourneau would be, having heard, the good news that, I mean, I appreciate that you were asking for the $6. I don't know if you
Yeah.
feel like there's some movement there, and if our letter, if the language suffices, or if we should target it even more. I don't want to wordsmith here, but we're just like,
So. Yeah, I mean, we haven't formally proposed anything yet. I think, it's up to the ultimately, so. We're certainly acutely aware of it. I mean,
okay, and I assume no conversation has been had on the parking part of it.
not for this year, because we just. Structurally, we'd have to do too much. We have to offset things if we're gonna reduce the budget, and I think we're doing, I know it doesn't seem like it, but we're doing a lot with the fare structure. This is probably one of the most active budgets Metro's had in quite some time because of all the changes in it. So I think it's a legitimate topic to take on for the next budget cycle.
Alrighty. Well, I think, yes.
Just one question, it's
Commissioner
really not a
Castillo, go
proposed
ahead.
change, but I was interested in the discussion that happened at the committee. So with regard to our weighing in with concerns about the use of federal preventative maintenance funding to back shortfalls. I'm generally not one for like tricky budgetary practices, but given that the feds are totally uninterested in paying for operating, and this is a
Yeah.
reliable form of capital revenue for them, is there a reason we are concerned or want to express a concern about it?
I think that we have, this budget as it stands now uses some of that money,
Right.
uses more of that money because it was new money.
Right, but so
So-
we're raising concerns about it as NVTC.
Well, what I interpreted it as was essentially generally raising concerns if Metro were to excessively use capital money, not the specific money in the proposal, but
Okay.
I don't know. That's what they.
The way it read, I read this as, because we
Okay.
support the solution for closing the fiscal 24 operating deficit, but we're concerned that Metro will become reliant on this budget tool to close future gaps. So I guess there's kind of a question of like, is it part of the ongoing budget? And if so, are we okay with this amount on an ongoing basis? But we don't want it to increase, or we're saying we hope Metro will find other ways to meet this need in future budgets?
That's how I read it. I
I
don't know.
think that's the interpretation.
The latter,
Yeah, the latter. Yeah. And this is really meant to be a one-time.
it is. Okay, that's Metro's
Yeah.
intent too. Okay.
And Matt and I both expressed some concern because we don't want what happened with Metro in the past where, it was easy to take money from capital and then the state of good repair and all the other projects,
Agreed, although that was before we had dedicated capital funding.
Well, that's the other.
I just think
important
about how
factor,
frustrated
right.
we get that the federal government is totally unwilling to pay for operations. And so if there is some way that we can back into that, but I take your point. And
And
it
there's-
maybe is not the sort of budget practice we want them to rely on.
Given everything where we are now politically, I mean, there's just no way.
Exactly.
We're gonna be lucky we can keep what we got.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Alrighty, well, with that, not hearing any comments, I believe we have some time, but we can go ahead and vote on the letter. Yeah.
Right. Well,
Well,
I was gonna move approval of the letter.
Okay, perfect. All right, so do I have a motion from Mr. Alcorn, I think a second from Mr. McKay.
We'll have someone outside Fairfax, maybe.
I'll move.
Judge prerogative, no. All right, Mr. Snyder.
Not very far on Fairfax.
We're in love.
All right.
It's a picture.
Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Excellent partnership on that one.
And Madam Chair, just a
yes.
quick announcement, the NVTC WMATA committee is going to be meeting again on Wednesday, April 19th at 6 p.m. in the NVTC conference room. This will not be a virtual or remote meeting. It's in person, at least for a quorum. The agenda will include an update for Metro staff, the Better Bus redesign, as well as introduction to the scope of the Metro operating funding and reform working group, and outlining the schedule for the 2023 WMATA annual. So, or to anyone of interest in that being a meeting too.
And to
All of them.
clarify, as you said, for quorum, so the quorum has to be there in person, but people can participate remotely as long as they're within their. And when would you like that to be announced?
We'll send out a reminder of it ahead.
Perfect. So anyone who would like to participate remotely, please let Rhonda and Mr. Alcorn know.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, moving on to number 5 at the end of session, our legislative updates. We do have NVTC's legislative liaison, Amy Brown Cyber, joining us virtually to provide an update what's been happening in the General Assembly session. And then Kate will follow up with a quick federal update.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Happy to give you a quick update. Obviously, the General Assembly adjourned on Saturday, adjourned on time with most of their work done, but not the budget. So as everybody I'm sure probably has heard, they passed a skinny budget which I sort of would equate to what Congress does with the continuing resolution, kind of filling some of the gaps until they get to the more details. I do think that they seem to be in pretty good shape. I think they're actually starting to talk at the end of this week. So they've had some conversations. We'll see if we get a budget before veto session or if it drags out into June. So I know other localities certainly hate the longer this takes because that makes it hard for you guys to do your budget. So I'm sure you're all staying pretty in tune to that. Had a pretty good session this year. I think it went by really quickly. I think we've ended and gone into election season really quickly. We've obviously, this is an unprecedented year with redistricting, and we've already had 18 retirements in the House and the Senate, which is more than I've ever seen. So 18 is a lot. We also have plenty of House members who are running for Senate seats. So we're going to be looking at, somewhere between perhaps 40 and 50 new legislators overall, if you're looking at both the House and the Senate together after 2023, which is just, it's never happened before. I mean, honestly, in Virginia. So that's a really big deal for us to think about as we start looking ahead to the next year. But to finish up, I mean, I think, all the bills that we had worked on and we've talked about, not too many things changed since the last update. As you guys know, we had the 2 bills that dealt with WMATA and VRE. Those made it through the process quite nicely. Some amendments were made. But honestly, all the work that we did beforehand with Director DeBrule, I think was hugely helpful and paid off. And it was actually a pretty smooth sailing. Couple little just, technical problems that we had, but that was just some amendments not getting adopted, but not for any actual reason besides just honestly, I think an oversight in the Senate. And so we've got all that taken care of, and those are on the way to the governor. We've got the TRIP bills, which we had talked about before. We also have the WMATA bill that dealt with the different red lights, which I know Greg worked hard on. And then the bill that was something that happened like right at the end of session was the bill dealing with assault and battery of transit drivers. Originally, the bill had a mandatory minimum sentence in there, and that did come out in the Senate. The Senate is not supportive of mandatory minimums, but what they ended up working out with the House was they ended up saying that it was going to remain a misdemeanor, but you could actually, someone would lose, if they were convicted, they would lose the ability to ride transit for up to 6 months. So that was the sort of compromise the House and the Senate came together on that, and that bill passed as well. The 2 bills that I think we still continue to have some concerns about, which I think there's unfortunately not too much that can be done about that, which is the TPOF bills, which is the Transportation Opportunity Fund. Unfortunately, money does come out of the transportation dollars as well as from the general fund. That bill also made it all the way to the very end. They had to do a conference committee to come up with some changes. They added some guardrails, but then they also sort of broadened the use. So it's still for transportation economic development programs, but it's also for programs that help economic development for transportation projects. But the guardrails are the governor can basically spend up to $5 million without any guardrails, $5 to $35 million. The secretary has to send a report to the General Assembly, and then anything over $35 million has to be spent. It has to go through the MEI Commission, which is the Major Employment Initiative Commission. That's where all the big projects go through. Like, for example, the big Amazon project, that's the group that worked on the whole Amazon project up in Northern Virginia and did that approval and all the economic development pieces that went along with it. So that's where the big projects always go anyway. So it's probably the right fit. And so that's where we are. The big issue is how much money are they going to allocate for it? So the governor's original introduced budget had $300 million allocated for TPOF. And then the House didn't change that. So that number was still 300 million. And then the Senate said it was 100 million. And so there's gonna have to be some sort of compromise on that. Obviously, the most obvious one would be that it would be 200 million, just find some spot in the middle. And that is probably likely. When I did talk to Senator Barker and some other folks, that they did say, like, and even Delegate Austin, who isn't enamored highly with this program, they've all sort of said, like, look, it's really for the life of the budget because the money has to be allocated through the budget. So that's something they can change. As you guys know, we're all going, but the state is going for some big projects right now, and that's really what the focus of this money is for, is transportation improvements around big economic development projects. So that's the big sort of outstanding piece that we have in the budget, but that's really it. Can't think of anything else that I think you all need to know too much about, but those are all the major ones, and I can turn it over to questions, and then happy to have Kate do the federal update.
Thank you, Amy. Hope you're getting some sleep these days. Any questions for Amy? All right, we're good. Thank you. Very comprehensive. Kate has her federal update.
Well, just a quick one, and we made references back in the consent agenda, but there are, additional competitive grant opportunities that are coming out under the bipartisan infrastructure law that were announced. And so FTA did announce the availability of $1.7 billion under its low and no emission program. And so that's the one that the city of Alexandria has applied for. And the reason I want to mention here is because I know that all of our localities are looking at these things. This is a pot of money. This program is authorized for the next 4 years, and it's actually a program that is older than the bipartisan. So the expectation could be that this does continue in the future. And so just to sort of put that radar on that this is for modernizing buses and bus facilities. It also supports workforce development related to employees that would be working on low and no emission vehicles. And so the grant season right now for that has an application deadline of April 13th, but it's expected that there's going to be an annual call for projects. So again, as a reminder, many of your localities are already working in this space. We are working with all of you on a regional strategic plan in this area. So there's definitely opportunities in the future, whether it be individual localities or even thinking regionally about some way to get access to these funds. It is very competitive, but it is $1.7 billion, which is not an insignificant amount of money. So I did want to put that out there. So that's just something to watch. We obviously are often watching those grant programs that are coming out. This is one that I think has probably got the greatest interest in our localities moving forward.
Awesome. Very exciting opportunities, and congrats to Alexandria for moving forward on that. Any questions for Kate? All right, see, I think we're 15 minutes ahead, team. Plenty of time for the meat of tonight, which are our staff presentations. Commuter choice program. We have Ben Owen and go with our commuter choice program. They're going to give us an update on the I-395 commuter choice program and eligibility results from the FY 24-25 program. This round is estimated at $45 to $48 million available, and Ben will explain the funding requests far exceed our funding availability, and we'll look at the investments for the 95 corridor. 95.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we will have a short briefing this evening covering mainly our eligibility screening results, but also what's coming up next, which is quite a bit of programming work. Next slide, please. So we shared a list of submitted applications via a commission memo last month, just after the close of our call for projects. What's really noteworthy in this round is demand for funding, which far exceeds anything we've seen in any prior round in either corridor, roughly $110 million among 18 applications. And this is in relation to $45 to $48 million in funding available for this round, which also is larger than usual. The annual transit payments from Transurban are roughly $15 million a year. But our last programs, in particular the last one, kind of undersubscribed. That was in the middle of the pandemic and demand was low at that point. This is going to give an uncertainty over what travel patterns look like. Next slide, please. We have conducted an eligibility review of all of those 18 applications. We worked closely with DRPT staff, looking at each proposed project's anticipated benefits to toll payers, as well as consistency with established program policy. We deemed 16 of those 18 applications eligible. These 16 have a total funding request of $89.5 million, and they'll be carried into technical evaluation, which we're now beginning, and public comment. There is a detailed list in the commission meeting materials, but just to give a quick kind of rundown of what's in there. One other thing I'll mention up front is 4 of the applications are for more complex construction projects. We do conduct additional readiness reviews for these to make sure they'd be able to meet our program funding obligation expenditure deadlines. Basically, all of our funds need to be expended within 5 years of being allocated. So it's kind of an emphasis in the program on projects with quick deliverability. We don't expect any red flags with those, but we are kind of in the process of wrapping those up. But in terms of what's in the 16, 10 represent transit service improvements. Of those, 9 are bus service improvements, and 8 are continuations of service improvements funded in prior rounds. So there are 5 OmniRide service enhancements, 2 Dash enhancements, and 1 Fairfax connector enhancement that are in service now. Basically, the recipients are looking for an additional 24 months of operation support for those, which is the most that we funded at the time. There's also 1 proposal to expand Metro bus service on Columbia Pike. Then we have 1 rail service improvement for the first time. That would be an additional round trip on the VRE Fredericksburg line. On the capital side, there are 5 proposals. 3 are rail capital expansions, specifically improvements to the Crystal City, Alexandria, and Franconia Springfield VRE stations. These would allow VRE to serve the stations with more than 1 full-length train at a time. In the case of Crystal City, that entire station is being relocated, and it may also serve Amtrak trains in the future. So it's a pretty big project there. 2 of the capital proposals are for bus improvements. 1 would help support Fairfax County's Richmond Highway BRT project. The other would purchase articulated buses for use on Dash's busiest bus route, their line 35. And last but not least, there's 1 transportation demand management strategy in there that would allow VRE pass holders to use certain Amtrak trains serving the Fredericksburg line, including on weekends, to expand the travel options available to them. Next slide, please. So here's where it gets exciting. We got a lot coming up in the next few months. The timing of the overall process is around getting a program of projects adopted in June into the coming fiscal year's 6-year improvement program. So with eligibility reviews complete, we're moving into scoring the 16 eligible applications. We will share the results with the NVTC PRTC Joint Commission Working Group, which is meeting in late April, along with the WMATA Committee. It's the day after that, the 20th, 4 p.m. virtual meeting. And the full commissions in early May. We'll also developing a programming strategy approach that we'll bring to the working group for consideration and endorsement. And this is an unusual round for a few reasons. First, just being the high demand for the funding, but we also have constraints on the amount of transit operations we can support. Our program MOA stipulates we can allocate a maximum of half of the funds transferred to us over any 9 years to transit operations. So we've estimated that about $16 million is the most we could comfortably put into transit operations in this round out of the 45 to 48. That would also allow us to grow that amount in the future. And the 16 actually would be a growth over the last round when we supported about $13 million in transit operations. One piece of good news there is that we define transit operations very narrowly to be basically just the direct costs of putting service on the road. So even though we have something like $29 million in requests for transit service improvements, only about 20 million of those costs fall under the specific definition of transit operations. Another element of the programming, so the commission's adopted some flexibility in the program policy a couple of years ago that allows that for larger construction projects, we could split those funding awards across 2 consecutive 2-year programs. So potentially funding part in this program, part in the next fiscal year 26-27 program. So that's something we may explore depending on kind of how the capital projects and the list shake out. But that would have implications for future programming as well. So there are some trade-offs with it. So it's going to be more scintillating than usual. So we would encourage any of you with an interest in the programming process to attend that Joint Commission Working Group meeting. Again, that's Thursday, the 20th of April at 4 p.m. virtually. And yeah, we may end up looking, historically, we've kind of done a top-down based on scoring, but we may end up looking at kind of more qualitative factors this time around as well. In mid-April, we'll also open public comments. We are excited for that process. It'll be fully online. We will again have English and Spanish versions of all materials available. We will be working with our applicants to help us amplify the word about the comment opportunity. We really would like to encourage them to promote it through their various channels to help us get as broad base of input from communities along the corridor as we can. In May, after all that's mostly done, we'll roll into briefings on the draft program of projects for the full commissions. We'll wrap up public comment, brief the Commonwealth Transportation Board, and then knock on wood, program approvals in June with distribution of project agreements and implementation of funded projects starting with the new fiscal year in July. With that, I am happy to take any questions you have.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And just a reminder to our commissioners, we do not have a regular commission meeting in April. So plenty of opportunity to attend the committee meetings. I know it's hard to step away from the month. But thank you, really appreciate it. Scintillating is a great word for this year's committee. You cannot miss that. And very much appreciate your work on it. I have one question and turn it over. And I know clearly this is going to go to the committee. Is there, you have it by jurisdictions, which is very helpful. Is there scoring in there, or how do the jurisdictional sort of divisions or makeup get scored into that?
We will see how the scoring shakes out. There is a criterion in there for applicant preference whereby every applicant was able to identify their top priority project and receive a modest number of points in the process for it. So that does help a little bit with the geographic distribution element. But I mean, the types of qualitative things we might look at are, what are various applicants' top priorities, what's ready for funding. But yeah, what we bring forward will be, as sound of a set of recommendations as far as we can, taking all the information into account that we have.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Bagley.
Thank you, Chair. I was curious, and I'm sorry if I missed it. What were the reasons the two projects were ineligible?
There was one that, one was a larger capital proposal that just wasn't going to be ready to start construction relatively quickly. So that was one where in both cases, we encouraged the applicants to do some more work on their proposals and come back in the next round. The other one was a park and ride proposal further south in the corridor where there wasn't really a direct nexus to benefiting toll payers at the corridor in terms of more transit service or something like that running from it.
Appreciate that. Thanks. Sure. And then I'm just kind of curious, when it comes to the jurisdictional ranking and preference, how does that apply to VRE?
Same with them. Each applicant gets to pick the top priority. So they picked a top priority in there as well. Yeah.
Okay. And it doesn't matter that they're like in multiple jurisdictions and then different kinds of projects. It's just interesting. So they still just do the one and then the rest shake out how they shake out.
Right.
Okay. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner.
Super fast, 89.5 in requests, and what was the pot again?
45 to 48 million available.
Thank you.
And 16 million of that is for transit operations, but according to our definition, only 20 million of the proposed
Right.
is considered transit.
Yeah, maximum 16 for the transit operations. It'll be interesting.
Yes. Scintillating. Chair back, so we're gonna have a fun time. All right, very good. Well, really much appreciate that. Very interesting time to be on that committee. So thanks to all who participate. All right, no more further questions. Thank you both for the presentation. Very much appreciate it. And next on the agenda, we're going to get an update on the work our Transit Resource Center team has been doing. First, we're going to get an update on our Vision Route 7 BRT project, and then receive a presentation and some analysis staff have been doing using NVTC's Nova Transit dashboard. And if you haven't had a chance to play with that dashboard, I highly recommend it. I think we've got Alan for that. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everybody. Like I said, we'll start first with BRT, then jump over to our very exciting dashboard. But I want to give a quick update where we are. We've been doing a lot of work in the last couple of months on our BRT project. So if you move to the next slide, just a very quick reminder for those listening on the public and for folks here of what this project is. It's a bus rapid transit project that connects Tyson's down to City of Alexandria via East Falls Church and through Arlington and the City of Falls Church as well. So big project we've been working on many years. Tonight, the analysis, the first part we're going to talk about is very much focused on the section that is from basically 66 south down through the City of Falls Church. So the next slide. So we're going to talk about two elements of what we've been working on tonight. The actual mobility study, the one you see highlighted as phase 4, and then also the strategic implementation plan. These are two parallel efforts that are really feeding into each other. And the strategic implementation plan we're going to talk about is going to directly guide all the next action steps we take over the next several years. Next slide. First, we'll start with the mobility study. It's a very intense amount of data modeling. So we've been working very close with all of your jurisdictions, all for the 4 partner jurisdictions, mainly at this point, City of Falls Church with a collaboration with other folks. We're modeling what different future year scenarios are. When you do these types of studies, you look at what is there today. That's kind of your no build. And then what type of infrastructure makes sense along the segment from 66 down through the City of Falls Church. So we're looking at up to 3 scenarios, playing with some of the different things when it comes to transit signal priority. Where do you have dedicated lanes? Where do you not have dedicated lanes? Where can you have improved facilities to make sure folks can access things safely, pedestrian access, a little bit of that. And then also queue jump lanes where buses have an opportunity to get ahead. So we're looking at all those different factors that make really good BRT and what are the right treatments at the right places along this corridor. I think it's really important to talk about this and jumping ahead just a second, because the refinement that we do in each one of these phases is going to help us with our future NEPA, our environmental analysis. We narrow it down and the different segments so we know we're looking at directly when we're working with that. So that work is ongoing right now. Our team's diving into that, like I said, working with all of your folks. But the one thing I really wanted to point out tonight is we are getting ready for our next round of public outreach when it comes to the specific segment focused on Falls Church. So throughout April, we're going to be at the point of scheduling some pop-up events and some what's the term they use? Bus stop chats. Get some of the folks out there, our team out there to talk to folks that use the services today that have an interest in there along the corridor. We are making sure we identify locations in the City of Falls Church and Fairfax County. So that's going to be throughout April, and it's probably a combination of farmers markets, supermarkets, some of the metro stations, some of the key intersections where kind of those major transfer stations are. Right now, we're working very closely. We hope to have all of that refined and exact dates and times, probably in the next week or so. And we'll make sure we share that with everybody, with all the commissioners. And we'll also, as we get closer, make sure we share some communications material as well, so you can help us get the word out about the different public meetings and all the events that are going to happen. Wanted to make sure we got this out to you early, since we don't have a May commission meeting, or sorry, an April commission meeting. We do have one in May. Yes. So make sure you get the information out early and often. So like we mentioned, I think we talked about the executive committee a little bit earlier, the public meeting we have actually scheduled for Tuesday, May 16th at the Barry Riley Stiles Public Library in Falls Church. We're working on an exact time. It's probably going to be a very similar format to last time, where we set up our materials, we invite folks in for the community, take a look, answer a lot of questions, have a formal presentation, then answer all the questions after that. So more details to come. We're literally, this past week has been really diving into refining what this looks like. So stay tuned for a lot of information from either our project manager, Xavier Harmony, or our communications team. You might hear from it from a couple angles to make sure we get the word out there. All right, next slide. So the other half of the effort is a strategic implementation plan. And this is something we've been working on for the last several months. This is an effort that's funded by NVTC and Fairfax County. As a big part of the corridor is in Fairfax County. So thank you very much for the support on moving this forward. Really appreciate that. We've been having very good conversations with the 4 jurisdictions that are along the corridor: Falls Church, Arlington, Alexandria, and the Fairfax County. We had a great workshop this past Friday with our staff, really diving into what it means to actually hit the ground running. When you get to the point of starting to move forward to implement, what does that implementation mean? We'll have some graphics in just a minute that kind of dive a little bit deep, see how complex it is. But also at the stakeholder meeting, we had representatives from Metro, DRPT, and we're now starting to pull in the Federal Transit Administration. We do see this potentially down the road as something that'll score really well and the under FTA programs. So getting them involved early, often keeping them informed. We'll be working with them closely when it comes to the environmental work that's coming up in the not too distant future. So working very closely with them. That's a great team we have there, and we're happy to keep moving forward with that. So next slide. So when we had the workshop last week, the big things, we kind of boiled this down to 4 really big questions of what we need to answer as we go forward. Who's leading what? Who has a capacity to operate it? What are the scenarios for different types of maintenance, ownership, operations? Who's the right person at the right time to make sure we get the project done on a reasonable schedule? And one thing that's not on there, but it's just as important, is going to be the funding. There's going to be within this plan a roadmap of when do we need to be applying for fill in the blank, FTA, NVTA, smart scale. When do you apply for those different pots of money at the right time to make sure that everything falls into place as we move forward? So it's key strategic decisions about funding, as well as some of the more granular day-to-day stuff. If you go to the next slide, you'll see a little bit deeper dive into all the different elements of what we need to work through. I'm not going to read all of what's on the slide there, but it's basically meant to look at the complexity of what it is. So you have an implementation bucket of tasks, you have service operations, then you have, once you get it built, we've got to maintain it, we've got to operate it, we've got to run it, all those types of things. And because this is a complicated project spanning 4 jurisdictions, we anticipate there's going to be lots of MOAs, agreements, legal agreements, funding agreements to make sure we successfully roll this out. So each one of those smaller boxes you see, there's a roadmap forward on how to implement that and get to the point where we're all on the same page and we're doing a coordinated effort as we go forward. So great conversation we've been having with the team. We're going to continue having that as we keep advancing this project. Next slide. So this is a kind of high level rolled up version of like the project phases of where they come. Right now, we're in the mobility phase. We talked about that a little bit earlier, where we've been working slowly down the corridor, starting in Tyson's, moving down through there. Now we're going from 66 down to Falls Church. And the next part of that mobility effort is going to be from south of Falls Church down to Alexandria. So the rest of that segment. So we've got a little bit more work to do on the mobility, and then we'll move into the environmental analysis. So the mobility environmental analysis, the earmark, the community funding grant that we got not too long ago, that's the pot of money that is going to help us advance through those next 2 phases to keep things moving forward. Then we can start to work on the environmental. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, as we refine things down and get it refined in each one of these segments, that's leading us up to a really good place. Like I said, great conversations we've been having with FTA. And then the other steps, as you see on most of your typical bigger projects, final design, construction, leading to operations. So a lot of work going on. NVTC has been leading the governance and coordination for a while, the study efforts. We see there's definitely a very much a strong role for NVTC to continue playing as we advance this project towards implementation. Next slide. And some milestones. So a lot of work has been going on, and we've got some pretty big milestones that are coming up over, let's say, the next 6 to 9 months, is what you see on here. I mentioned the workshop that we did last month. So moving forward on that, we're working on a traffic simulation, all the work on the strategic implementation plan throughout spring. We're going to start wrapping up some of that, putting those materials together, continuing to work with all of your staffs, and having key times coming to the commission and the different committees to talk about where we are with the implementation plan. So in March, we have a jurisdictional and partner stakeholder meeting. That's all of your staffs, all of those different agencies we showed earlier, sitting down, talking through the technical side of things. On April 20th, as was mentioned earlier, the program advisory committee is going to receive a little bit more of an update. What have we done as we advance these 2 efforts moving forward? I mentioned the public meeting in May. And towards the summer, this is summer, beginning of fall, is that we're going to get closer to wrapping up that mobility study, getting ready for that next phase. It's going to go from south of Falls Church down to Alexandria. And then actually we will have a couple actions probably in July or September. We're looking at basically acceptance by the commission of the study so we can keep moving things forward. And then, as I mentioned on there, always early and often coordination and engagement with FTA and all those other important partners along the way. So that's a brief update of where we are with Route 7, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Alan, very detailed. I really appreciate the roadmap and info. Any questions or comments? Yes, Commissioner Barber.
Yeah, perhaps an odd question. So as far as who's going to be operating it, wait, what are the options? What?
Okay, there are practically two options out there. Metro Bus is one option that we've been talking about looking at because they are the regional provider. And they're the only other organization that potentially could operate would potentially be Fairfax Connector. I think over 50% of the corridor is in Fairfax County. Lots of policy decisions made. That one slide that had all those little things broken down, figuring out who the operator is one of those really important ones that drives a lot of decisions. It drives what types of funding can you use to actually pay for the service. Each one comes with pros and cons. So diving into those, it's almost like with this implementation plan, it doesn't answer very many questions, but it's getting us to the point where we're asking the right questions at the right time. So going forward, we're making very, very informed decisions that make sure this is a successful project.
Yes.
So in a perfect world, we get through the phases, we start construction, there's supply chain issues, no issues right away. When is like in a perfect world potentially an opening? And I'm just gonna add 2 or 3 years to that for.
It's one of those, I will really say it's like, I don't want to say a date because once you say a date, you can never unsay it. And I will just say that we are working as hard as we can to advance things as fast as we can within the resources that we have. And as we constantly search those, we will find ways if there are to move things faster.
Fair enough. Yeah. 0 months or years. And can you remind me, Ellen, how many miles is this span?
I think it's approximately 14 miles.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions for Ellen? Yes, Commissioner Faust.
Is there a scenario that is being evaluated where this would open in segments? For example, license the Falls Church.
That is a discussion that has been thrown out there. Implementing a 14-mile corridor is a big undertaking. Do you do something that's a little more manageable in phases? That's, I think, always an option for big transit projects. A lot of it comes down to funding, the commitments, what funding you can line up to get it working. But that is, I think, always one of the things, even as something FTA understands that there are those minimal operable segments that really make sense, that can meet all the goals, what you wanted to meet with it, and then build off of that. So that is an option that we have discussed as something that is a potential possibility as we go down the road.
Big questions tonight. Anything else? GR27? Yes. Commissioner Snyder.
Just a quick comment. I want to thank everybody involved in this project. Let's figure out how to move it. An answer to this gentleman.
Absolutely. Very exciting.
Absolutely.
Thank you definitely for the whole team. Much appreciated. All right, very good. So now we are on to the dashboard. And we do have printed copies. I think there's make a bit of an overview. That's fine.
Always. So I think, as we know, last December, we debuted the Nova Transit Dashboard, an interactive tool that allows you to visualize, compare, and analyze an immense amount of data. And again, we're getting that data. All of our localities do report that to DRPT. We pull things from DRPT. We also get things from WMATA and from Veery, and then stuff directly even from the transit agencies. So we have all that data in one place. So now our team is able to really dive in and tell the stories and trends. So tonight, we're going to be looking at bus stops. Well, okay, not in like the real physical sense. There's probably a lot we can do in that space, but we're going to be looking at bus stops through the lens of the service that a rider can access when they're at our bus stops here in Northern Virginia, and what that really means for their mobility within the region. And so they've got some great visuals and a great story to illustrate this and just explain a little bit more in detail how the Northern Virginia bus service compares to peers in our greater DC metro area, as well as sort of how we can look at our network as a whole. And so just stepping back as you look and listen to the presentation, keep in mind, there's a bunch of different bus planning efforts that are going on in the region. We are just starting our Northern Virginia regional bus analysis. That's going to be pulling together all of the strategic plans that your individual transit agencies have done, but we're doing it as a regional overlay, putting together, telling the story as a region, identifying any gaps, opportunities, and what have you, including looking at projected financial needs. Second, we talked about it before, the WMATA committee will get a deeper dive on that. The WMATA's Better Bus Redesign effort that kicked off. We're very closely engaged. Our team is working with them on that work. And so obviously that's an element of how Metrobus is serving. But again, we're looking at everything holistically. And so once again, just as a reminder, we do continue to work collectively with our localities bus systems as well as with WMATA and a lot of different things. So I have talked way too much. So I'm going to turn this over to Xavier and Sophie, who have just a really fun presentation that really starts telling the story.
That's great. I don't know why when I was clicking it wasn't going. So your computer knows you. Okay, so the Nova Transit data dashboard, good start. I'm going to start with where we left you off when we presented this in December. So in December, we had several different pages of this dashboard, and we're really focusing, driving down on one page, one of those aspects, which is access, especially access to bus. So in December, we talked about how much access each intersection have to transit. We looked at access to stops, metro rail stations, VRE stations, and paratransit, broken down by population and by jurisdiction. However, what December's analysis included access to bus, but with no consideration as to how or why bus was being used. And this is something that we're correcting a little bit with this update to the dashboard. So some of the things that we're considering are like, does a rider have access to a service that is frequent enough they don't really have to check a schedule to use the bus? Or can a restaurant worker finishing work late at night access the bus to get home? Or can people access the bus on weekends to go shopping or go to the park? These additions to the dashboard can help fill these gaps. Before I move to the next slide, I want to be clear that when I'm talking about access at a jurisdiction, I'm talking about all the bus services that are operating that jurisdiction. So using Arlington, for example, it could be any bus service that's in Arlington. That includes ART, it includes WMATA, it even includes OmniRide, who has bus service in Arlington. So it's access to a bus in that jurisdiction. Now, so specifically looking at bus access for bus needs. So in doing this, we identified 3 new scenarios of access. So what this image on the left sort of shows you is that hatched gray background is access to all bus service in the region. And the green, in this example, is access to one of these scenarios, which is high frequency bus. So this table in the middle of the slide gives a definition of each of these new scenarios. So high frequency bus, we defined as 15-minute or better headways. That means you don't have to wait. The most you have to wait for a bus is 15 minutes. And so it could be less, but most is 15 minutes. And we define this as weekdays at 7 to 8 a.m. to give the best chance of having that high frequency bus. Late night buses essentially after 9 p.m. on a weekday. So 9 to 10 is when we chose that window. And then weekend is any buses on Saturday and Sunday. I will note that due to data limitations, the city of Fairfax and Q were excluded from this analysis. So you might see some service in city of Fairfax, but because we couldn't include Q, they're not included when we talk about the regional patterns and trends we find here. So the next slide, I'm actually gonna go through each of these scenarios and show you what that looks like. I'm gonna pause just so you can sort of see it go through each of these scenarios. So there's high frequency bus service, late night bus service, weekend bus service, and that's all bus service. So as you can see, as it scrolls through each of these different scenarios, there's quite a bit of a difference in what we mean by like what we can access in each of these different scenarios. And access to all bus service, as we saw there, doesn't necessarily mean you can access a bus when you need it or for all uses. This is why we did this additional work to figure out where you can access bus in these different situations and these different scenarios. Before we talk about some of the other results, I want to give a little bit of wider context. Kate mentioned that we are able to look at this in the context of the Washington, D.C. region. And one of the projects that's come before us that's done this is the bus transformation project. This was done in 2019, and it looked at bus in a very similar way. It actually looked at all these three scenarios that we looked at as well, but for a different reason. So this considers all of the NVTC jurisdictions, as well as Washington, D.C., Montgomery County, and Prince George's County. So again, a wider geographic context. The results help us understand our findings in this context. And some key results to keep in mind before we go through our results is that 81% of the Washington, D.C. area population has access to a bus stop, and 48% of the population has access to high frequency service. So these are some contextual numbers to think about before we go to our results. Northern Virginia's results will look a little bit different, keeping that in mind, but our land use and population density is also very different to the greater region. So this you see on the right is actually the greater DC region. The red colors are very high density population density. The pale green is the lowest population density. So especially when you consider Washington, D.C., the density in there, and then Virginia, you can expect that there might be some differences. Again, just framing this conversation before we show some of the results of Northern Virginia. Our results look different, but there's some good reasons, but also some potential work for us more to do in the future. So I'm going to pass over to Sophie to give some of the results.
Thank you. So as expected, we did find that not all bus access is created equal. The region as a whole has more access to late night and weekend service than high frequency service. In fact, Northern Virginia's population has about 3 times more access to any bus than frequent bus. So if you think back to that GIF that was cycling through, you saw a little bit of green and then the big rest of the hatched area. And then if you look at the gray bars, I doubt you can see my mouse, but the gray bars in each of these subsections show that high frequency access right here with the lowest little bar there is at 18%. That's high frequency access to transit for the total population, compared to 62%. 62% of the region's residents who have access to any kind of transit. However, if you look at a specific demographic group, the trends start to shift. So zero-car households, which is in the light green, has the highest access to transit. That includes the highest access to transit for high frequency transit, late night, and weekend. And this shows that those without cars have the ability to get around with using transit outside of those classic peak period times, which kind of goes along with those opening questions that Xavier had, those little scenarios. On the other hand, non-white populations have less access to any bus service of the population subgroups. And when I say subgroups, I mean these 3 subgroups to the right. So that's, the different colors. The subgroups are zero-car households, non-white populations, low-income populations, and public transit commuters. So 19% of the non-white population in Northern Virginia has access to high-frequency bus service, that is actually higher than the 18% of the total Northern Virginia population that has access to frequent bus. So when we zoom into a jurisdiction, we can see a much different story of bus access. So non-white populations in Alexandria have the most access to high-frequency bus service compared to other Alexandria populations. The city's access to high-frequency bus service in general is much higher. So this gray 61%, we can think back to the, I believe it was 18% of high-frequency total population. So anyway, moving on, 93% of zero-car households in the city have access to late night and weekend service. And then finally, I just want to tie this back to Dash's network redesign, which aimed to provide access to high-frequency bus, focusing on an increase to access for low-income minority and senior residents. So what have we learned from this work? From this little research we did? Clearly, there's a lot to absorb from this data. This isn't even like beginning to scrape the top of what we have in the dashboard and have even with this data. But we identified 4 main takeaways that lead us to the so what of this research. So why is this important? First of all, access must consider how people use the bus beyond just if there's a bus stop near you, but when does it come, how often, etc. Next, the goals and values that shape planning can have real impacts on the region. Like I mentioned with the Dash Network redesign, the goals and values of the plan were evident in our findings. We also found that there is good bus access in Northern Virginia, but this exercise shows that there's also a lot more work to be done. Like Xavier mentioned with the 2019 bus transformation project, and the similar work they did for the DC region, they found that 81% of the region's population has access to a bus stop, and 48% of the population, of that same population, has access to high frequency service. We can compare this to the 62% of Northern Virginia that we found with who had access to bus, and that's 18% of the Northern Virginia population that has access to high frequency service. With these statistics, like Xavier mentioned, it's important to consider the differing land use between the 2 regions. For example, very densely populated urban DC was included in that bus transformation project. Obviously, DC is not included in our Northern Virginia project. We have different land use. And finally, the results we found are building blocks for future regional planning work, and they will help us identify where there are network gaps and opportunities for improving the region's bus system. So on that note, I'm going to switch things up a little bit and give you a demo of what this all looks like on the dashboard itself. So it's going to change in a second. There you go. This is all up to date on the website, so I encourage you to go explore there, but we're going to go to the access to transit tab right here, and it's going to take you there. So this is almost identical to what you've seen before, except there's one super cool new feature, which is the type of bus access that you can explore. So when you come in and you're on the mode of bus specifically, you can look at high frequency, you can look at late night, or you can look at weekend access to bus. Right now we're looking at for the entire, we're looking at it for the entire Northern Virginia region, but we can also look at a specific county. Like Xavier mentioned, right now, City of Falls Church isn't included, but we're hoping to kind of add that back in once we have less data limitations. But if we want to look at Fairfax, we can check out the different options here. And then go back. And that's kind of it. That's mostly what I wanted to show you, is that there's this new drop down that kind of expands the options, and that creates a lot more data that you can check out about access to transit, and specifically access to bus. So I will stop talking and let everyone ask questions. Unless you have any things.
Okay. Thank you so much, Xavier and Sophie. I didn't think the dashboard could get cooler and more scintillating, but there we are. Any questions or comments on the dashboard? And then we probably want to spend some time playing around with it. Thank you. I know I appreciate your insights, because I was pretty surprised that it's not what I would have expected. That the high frequency is so much lower than the late night and weekend. So it's interesting to have as we plan ahead. All right, then. I think everyone's ready for this fun evening. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the work and the.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Turner.
Just a quick comment. I'm looking at the regional bus analysis bar graph. And I'm focused in on, obviously, the non-white population is lower than the other categories. Unless I'm reading this wrong, that could be deceptive and counterintuitive, though. It could be in the Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia area that the non-white population has cars and are in fairly well-off neighborhoods, which is why they have the lowest percentage. When you look at this bar graph, you immediately jump to the conclusion of we're not serving our non-white population, when in fact, the non-white population may have simply not fallen into that category to the extent that the others do, because they have automobiles and they are in areas that don't use the bus district. So if there's not really any value in my comment, other than the fact that I immediately thought that's a problem. And then when I thought about it some more, I thought, maybe it's not a problem. We kind of got to dig down a little bit.
Yeah, I will point out that there is not really a way to tell with the data we're using, census data. You can't tell which people have which access to which vehicles.
Right.
So it is a hard thing to tease out. That is just looking at those metrics. Those populations are only compared within themselves. So that's 19% of only the low income population that have access to the bus. So it's not compared to anyone except other, non-white population. That's compared to not anyone else except other people, non-white population, non-white population. So they just can be compared to themselves. It is, there could be those things going on. It's hard to tease those things out at census data, which is by definition aggregated. So it is what it is. It allows us to look at some of these patterns, but all data have limitations. So this is just one of the limitations of these data.
Yeah, I think, well, I looked at it and I thought I could see a member of the public going, well, look at that right there. You see that? And off we go to the races. And it would be nice to have some backup to say, okay, this is what makes up that number. It's just a thought.
Interesting enough, and definitely a lot of analysis that can be taken out of this and the lack of data as well. All right, well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. So Xavier to work on that. And that brings us to item 8, which is VRE. There are no VRE action items tonight. There is one written update in your meeting materials about the Broad Run expansion. So I'll ask Mr. Dalton to give his report and give each VRE operations board Chair Walkinshaw an opportunity to make any comments. Who wants to go first? Write it out. You win. Rich, you win. You came the farthest.
Thank you, Madam Chair and commission members and others. Once again, you do have some information items, a packet from the February operations board meeting in there for your review. In addition to that, you have the CEO report as well. I'll just give a couple of updates on key metrics from a system reliability standpoint. The month of February, albeit one fewer day than January, we're still hovering in that 85–86% on-time performance. Of course, our ultimate our target is 90%. One of the reasons we were actually tracking pretty good for the month, and then a planned maintenance event come through on the CSX side, and with some additional work. And so it dropped our on-time performance on that line a little bit. Hit us pretty much last week, but we are definitely advocates and we want maintenance done. So let them get in there, get that done, and then move on. From an average daily ridership standpoint, again, one fewer service day, but our average daily ridership jumped up about 300 for the month. And of course because of the 19 days or the one less service day, our total ridership was down slightly, but again, average daily ridership is up. I will also want to point out that in the CEO report, we did start putting in tracking for the total number of bikes that we're carrying on board VRE trains, and that's something that, through the leadership of the operations board last year, we did modify our onboard bicycle policy and have been promoting that. And so similar to January, we carry over 1,100 bicycles on board all VRE trains for the month. So just want to continue to track that and encourage that multimodal approach to engaging in VRE.
I believe Commissioner Bagley's bike might have been one of those. It might have been. 2 rides. Yeah.
That's my summary, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dalton. Again, happy to see the always positive news to increase ridership and the maintenance. I think we all have seen why it is so critical to make sure that the maintenance part is there, even if it creates a little bit of a slowdown at times. Good. Mr. Walkinshaw?
Nothing, I think Rich covered it.
All right, we are here keeping it easy tonight. Any questions or comments from our commissioners? All right, we're gonna get tougher crowd next month, not next month,
No.
next time, in 2 months.
I thought you were setting me up. Come back next month.
We'll see you right here. No, we won't. All right,
Sure.
thank you, Mr.
Thank
Felton.
you.
All right, wonderful. So that brings us to DRPT and Director DeBrule. If you're there, you are. If you'd like to give us your report.
Good evening, everyone. You have my written report in your package for tonight. I will just highlight a couple of really key staffing changes for DRPT for you this month. You may notice I don't think we have any staff in the room because our two key staff that have backed me up at NVTC over the past year have both made some changes. Clinton Edwards left DRPT last week and has gone to work for Arlington County. So our loss is definitely Arlington's gain. Just proud of the great folks that we've had come through our agency and love seeing them do great things when they leave us. The other person that is missing in the room tonight is Tim Roseboom. Tim is still with DRPT. He's our WMATA program manager. He is relocated with his family back home to Michigan. So he is working remotely for us for the time being and is online with us this evening watching on YouTube. So Tim's going to stay with us through the summer and get us through the cycle of WMATA certifications and updates to the boards, to our board's WMATA policy as a result of legislation this session. So really grateful for Tim and his contributions to our program and in partnership with WMATA and NVTC over the years. Last staffing change I'll mention is a real positive one. That is Amy Garbarini, who has been with us since 2021, was promoted and is now our Northern Virginia Transit Planning Manager. So we're really happy to have Amy step up and take on that promotion and role in our Alexandria office. So lots of change with DRPT, but the constant is that we're here to partner with you in the region to see our transit systems be successful, and I look forward to continuing to be able to do that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Director DeBrule, and congratulations on getting through mostly getting through a General Assembly session. I know the budget's still there, but really appreciate your work down in Richmond in support of transit and transportation. Any questions or comments? Director DeBrule? Yes, Mr. Snyder.
I just wanted to make a very positive comment about one of the projects that Jennifer has worked on, which is the Virginia Breeze bus system, and I've ridden it. Modern buses, great drivers, and really a great way to get from Northern Virginia and Washington DC to Richmond. So just wanted to make that point, and I think Jennifer was really the founder of that whole system. So thank you.
That may in fact be my bus baby, which is what we call it in the office. But we were awarded an Apt to Add Wheel Award this week for the Virginia Breeze for our marketing campaign and ridership recovery. So we're really proud of that program. So thank you, Mr. Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. All right. Well, thank you to our commissioners. We are now 25 minutes ahead of schedule. Turning it over, it's all on you now, Kate, for your report.
I will not drag on. As always. All right, as always, Madam Chair, I'm proud to highlight our latest newsletter. It's got lots of great things for folks. We've got some highlights from Black History Month of some wonderful former commissioners that were sitting on NVTC. Lots of overview. Our communications team are actively working with the public information officers within the region to get ready for our big marketing campaign later. So a little bit of highlight on that in there. As well as information on some of our recent transit technology workshops and things like that. So always a great thing to take a look at. When we look ahead to meetings, I know we've talked a little bit. One thing I realized I missed mentioning a little bit early on, I didn't know if Director DeBrule was going to mention, but the Transit Service Delivery Advisory Committee's meeting tomorrow, that's TSDAC, bright and early tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And so TSDAC is reconvening. As a reminder, this is the group that helps advise DRPT on the allocation formula that DRPT gives to its capital and operating funds. So obviously with the legislation that affected VRE, that is something that's going to actually go into effect next fiscal year. There's actually sort of a delayed enactment. It also is not technically signed into law yet. So we do have our first look at the proposed allocations for FY '24. That's going to be the topic of conversation tomorrow. Overall, most of our bus systems here in Northern Virginia do see a really positive uptick in DRPT funding they're going to anticipate. I do want to note Loudoun County Transit and VRE both see funding coming in lower. Again, these are based upon the formulas that have been in place. That's part of the reason why VRE pulled out. And I know Loudoun is already aware that they're going to be seeing a little bit less than they did last year. Our other local bus systems, though, just as a general reminder, a lot of this is how well those systems are doing compared to their others within the state. So the Northern Virginia bus systems in general, not all, seem to be doing really well. And we're talking a 20 to 30% potential increase in DRPT funding for next year. So I'm looking forward to the briefing we're going to get to that. And hopefully I'll be able to report back on that when we come back here in May. So the next meeting indeed is May 4th. And so we will have obviously a full agenda going on there. If anybody wants to dress in the Star Wars thing, they're welcome to do so. And we will have the executive committee meeting upstairs. At this point, we're trying to move our executive committees to be at 6:15 unless we have a bigger agenda. I think that's been working out well. But of course, before that, we do a number of different committee meetings. We've heard a lot about those. And as always, all commissioners are invited to participate in those. Again, we've got the WMATA committee and then the Joint Commission Working Group and Program Advisory Committee. And so if you're interested in those topics, please come on, or you even can watch the YouTubes because those will be on. Also just a heads up for those who are on the Legislative Policy Committee, we are thinking about doing a mid-May convening of that committee to really dive into our initial findings, or at that point, hopefully be further along on our value of transit study. Those things are moving along very well. So we want to do a deep dive with the Legislative Committee and also talk strategy for this coming year. We do anticipate obviously a lot of changes within the General Assembly. And so we want to get ahead of that. So stay tuned. We'll be working with the chair of the committee to identify a date in May. I know May is a busy month. And then finally, looking even a little bit further, our June meetings, we do have Randy Clark invited and confirmed to be joining us to be giving an overview of WMATA. We did have him move it back a couple months. And so we'll be able to use that. Maybe that kind of ties up with some of our conversations in the legislation. Say that. So that concludes my report, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mattice. And I just want to say, pictures in here, had such a wonderful time visiting your staff during the retreat, especially seeing the ones I haven't gotten to meet because they don't get a chance to join us at our late night meetings.
So indeed, we do, if I could, Madam Chair. So at least once a year, we do a professional development training day in the office. And so we did have ours in January, with everyone knows. So there are some sort of fun interactive pictures. And this one was really celebrating both the history of NVTC as well as looking forward to the big work we have going on this year at the staff level. So it's always a really rewarding day.
Very exciting. Well, thank you so much. I know we will all miss our April meetings, but as was said, I know they're not on the save the date here, but we do have meetings in April. Yes. All right. Any further comments, questions, complaints from our commissioners? All right. Well, hearing none, we are adjourned. That's hold on. It's 8:30. I know. Oh, sorry. Do I need to motion? Okay.
I did at my.
Thank you.